Welcome to the Heaven on Earth podcast, a world where you study the story you were born into and redesign it into the story you choose. A world where you can have heaven on earth right here, right now, no matter the past. For me, heaven on earth is a holistic experience, leading with the heart, engaging with mind, body, and spirit. It's mindful, fostering calm and secure attachments. As we rise into consciousness, it's an earthly journey where we sensually embrace dynamic living.
Julie Lopez, finally, we are here and welcome to the Heaven on Earth podcast. It is such a thrill for me to have you. And there's so much I want to say about us doing this podcast together, but I'd like to start off with the fact that you and I have been around each other for over 20 years, really, professionally. We're both psychotherapists here in Washington, D.C., and we've just been around our circles. You've worked with people that I've worked with, and we've heard about each other, and then we've connected and then bounced out again and then connected. And since last year and this year, these have been the years that we've actually really come together as professionals and as joy buddies in this earth life, for sure. And just been in full multi-layered type of discussions that we tend to have. So let me introduce you. You beautifully. And I want everyone to know that Julie goes by Dr. Julie, and she's a super well-known, well-established, trauma-informed psychotherapist here. And she's been called by media and the courts to provide her expertise in trauma. She works with brain-based interventions for the last 30 years. When it wasn't in, y'all. When it wasn't in, and we're going to talk about that today in the podcast. So she's a leader. She's a leader in trauma-informed care. Again, when this wasn't even a phrase, she was a leader in trauma-informed care. And her passion comes from her journey as an adoptee and her own personal trauma, which I know that we talked about you sharing a bit of that because of the month we're in. And you can talk about that. April. After a decade as an adjunct graduate professorship, Dr. Julie designed the Trauma-Informed Clinical Practice Certification Program. And that's here with Viva Partnership, which I'd like you to talk about the Viva Center as well, because it is such a monument to psychotherapy here in Washington, D.C., and I refer so many people to it, and it was you who started it. And she was awarded Social Worker of the Year by the Centro Familiar. Dr. Julie habla español y es latina como yo. She has also written a book. So please, everyone who's watching this podcast, write this down. It's called Live Empowered, where she focuses on trauma resolution. Wow. I could go on and on because there's so much more to you and about you. But Julie, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, can I pop in for a few things?
Absolutely.
First thing, well, I don't even know what to say. You're so awesome, Claudia. I love how you're trying to inspire people to live their best lives. And even, who wouldn't want to be on a podcast called Heaven on Earth, right? Because that sounds amazing. Everybody wants that. That's part of the human condition, to feel alive and to feel actualized and who we are and what we love and who we love and all that stuff. So hats off to you for that and your recent accomplishment with your book and all the goodness you're sprinkling throughout the world. I love it. And, I don't know how many people listening or watching know Claudia, but she carries that same beautiful energy with her everywhere she goes. We went to lunch a couple of months ago, and everyone in my regular circuit, because she was in my neighborhood, was like, who was that? She's so great. Who was because you just radiate this amazing energy, which I love. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say, just because you mentioned it, first of all, I just go by Julie. I'm super informal. So I don't really go by Dr. Julie. I do have a PhD, but I even did a comedy stand-up training class. It was for entrepreneurs, and we performed at Caroline's on Broadway when it was all done. And I did a whole bit, one of my bits, because you string together these bits. I learned so much about comedy. But one of my bits was about becoming a doctor, and piled high and deep is the PhD, and then the MD, and Dr. Dre, and the easy and harder ways to become a doctor. Anyway, yeah, I'm very informal, Julie. The award was by the National Association of Social Workers. So that was pretty cool. Social Worker of the Year. And really, my book is focused on helping people really recognize that our bodies are amazing. And it teaches about something nerdy, but in a really easy to digest format. And the basic message is there are so many different ways to get relief from symptoms that you struggle with, to change the way you look at life, to really substantively shift the way your body's reacting to something. And I just think there aren't enough people out in the community that know that it's possible. So it really is talking about some more advanced techniques of brain and body-based work, non-talk based, because a lot of times, especially if people have been through something terrible, they've made a pact with themselves never to talk about it again, never to say anything, to kind of compartmentalize it, which we do to survive and adapt. And so anyway, I just wanted to say it is called Live Empowered, but the point of it is that there are these really cool opportunities for healing, and that sometimes people think, oh, you know, the final thing I should do looking for help is go talk to a therapist. But there's many different types of therapists, and some therapists only do a certain type of therapy, which may or may not work for you, because we're all unique. So it's really a book about hope, that there are lots of options, and getting empowered around that, so you don't fall into one of those places of despair. So anyway, I just wanted to say a little more about that. And then I'm happy to talk about my story or anything you want to talk about.
I want you to.
And the way we're all connected and all the things. So you do your magic.
Absolutely. I'm going to cue you up because there's so many delicious things I want you to talk about. But nerdy is extra cool over here. And I think what's happening now is, how do we make these big concepts, these PhD concepts, into bites that we can absorb and digest, so that all of us can be healing, that we do not have to be academics or professors in order to do the healing work, which is what heaven on earth is, right? And Julie, one of the reasons why it's so special for me that you're on here, not only because you teach it as an academic, because you're an academic, you're also used to be, right? But you're a practitioner, and it's your own story. And one of the things that I asked you to prep was, the way that I approach the podcast is to talk about the 3 volumes. Volume 1 being the story you were born into. Volume 2 being the awakening story, like what happened where you decided, hey, I'm going to start doing not only work on myself, but work with others. And volume 3 is this, the heaven on earth life. And you talk about it, the idea that hope and possibility, no matter what our past has been, what I call trauma rising, no matter what. So can we start with your trauma rising story, and start with, you're always so open about your story. And I think it's because it tracks the journey of possibility. And Julie, can you say something about why we chose the month of April to do this recording?
Sure. I'll tell you the beginning of my story of how I popped on the planet, and then I'll tell you one of the many national awareness months that April happens to be.
Yes.
So I was, I came out of a trauma explosion, really. My biological mother was 15 when she was, my 15-year-old virgin mother was 15 when she was date raped by my father. She never talked to him after that day. She never called it rape because it was her boyfriend. So she thought, how can that be a thing? But then that was obviously
What did she
traumatic.
call it? What did she call it, Julie? It
Nothing
wasn't
really.
how date rape was talked about.
It
Yeah.
wasn't. She didn't talk to anyone about it, really. It was just a really traumatic experience. And she, again, I knew from talking to her as an adult when I met her later in my adult years that it was rape, because I was working actually at the DC Rape Crisis Center. It was definitely unwanted. I mean, obviously, she really liked this person she'd been dating for a few months and never talked to him after that. Clearly unwanted. But that set the course. That was the life I was born into, meaning she was sent away from her family. She was really traumatized at the time. It was called a home for unwed mothers. There's a ton of shame. She changed her mind about wanting to give me away. It was a Catholic organization. It was Catholic Charities, but she didn't have any rights as a minor. So she was forced by her parents to sign on the dotted line as she was a young person. And that caused a lot of trauma for her a million times over, and the family system. Frankly, my grandparents got divorced. It caused a lot of struggle. They're a Mexican family, and that wasn't really the norm to give, one of your children away. And then I was in an orphanage for 3 months and then adopted by my lovely family, who my adoptive father is also Mexican American. So relatively in the same race. A lot of my friends who are adopted people struggle with transracial adoption, which causes a whole bunch of other struggles around loss of culture and identity beyond what adopted people go through. But April is National Adoption Awareness Month. It's a lot of months, actually. It's also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So there is a lot there during these last few days of April. Yeah.
Yeah, I so honor this story. I really feel like how this is exactly the type of space that that we need to be having these discussions and conversations and having them ripple out and understood.
Yeah.
Tell me what ensued. Tell me what ensued
Well,
and
so
what you
one of the
understood
things
about
I would
yourself.
want to say also, which I gave nod to in every chapter of my book at the end, like one little page that I would speak to, is that I'm going to share a few stats and I'm going to tell you about my life. And that is that adopted people are grossly overrepresented in drug treatment facilities, grossly overrepresented in residential treatment programs, grossly overrepresented in suicide statistics. And there's a reason for this. The dominant narrative about adoption is it's like tied up with a nice, neat bow, right? It's like a win-win-win all the way around. And growing up, that's what I was told, and that's how I was encouraged to be. And how I coped with this status and kind of what was going on in my body was through performance, like unhealthy performance, like compulsive behavior, people pleasing, all of that stuff. And looking back now as someone in their 50s, I realize a lot of my childhood, I was extremely disconnected from my sense of myself. I was extremely disconnected from my sense of what I wanted, what I liked. I was very focused externally on how to make sure that I wouldn't be tossed out again. It was very unconscious. I didn't even know, like a fish in water. I didn't know there was water there, but it was extremely unhealthy. And I think the statistics bear that out, that the trauma of relinquishment and then the pieces that ensue and the losses that go sometimes, many times, the majority of the time unspoken. I really couldn't have processed any of that unless my parents had been empowered to understand that my little nervous system was probably a bit fried. And that's not what they were told. They were told this was the happiest thing ever, and it was happy for them. But I was struggling.
Right. I think one of the things you're saying that's so important is that there's some sort of mirage of what you just called the win-win, right? Like, oh, this family wanted a baby and the baby's been chosen. And that's true. There might be some truth to the fact that there's a win-win there, but part of the narrative that has to be lived up to is what you're saying is that this is amazing. I should feel really happy. And this is a great story that I've come into, without the words though, without the words. That was part of the disconnect. That's part of the disconnect, is what you're saying, is that it's supposed to be all around a happy story.
And it isn't. Right. And it isn't. There's some other things that have happened, and there are a lot of losses that are not being communicated about. Exactly. And obviously, since you work with trauma as well, or have a background in working with it, the best thing that could happen theoretically is that someone who's had something very distressing happen in their life is to integrate it. And that doesn't mean that it now is a bed of roses. It's like, yeah, something really hard happened to me. And that was hard. And I honor that. And I recognize there may be good things that came out of it, or it may have led to something better. As a matter of fact, that's a guiding principle of my life. I've been through lots of really difficult things, and I see how either I've grown as a person, or it's taught me an important lesson, or maybe another portal opened that had been closed until something went on like that. But with the adoption narrative, and here's a sidebar, this isn't really my piece of the puzzle, but trust me, there are a lot of advocates looking at the loss of human rights and the fact that a lot of adopted people don't have access to their original birth certificates and things like that, is that the lack of recognition of the trauma behind every separation, for whatever reasons, money, mental health, resources of time and energy, housing, whatever it may be, that cause a baby to be, or maybe lost, maybe their family is all killed and they're orphaned, but like that is traumatic. And we know our cells take that data in, and the dominant narrative is being pumped out by $1 billion industry. And I know that's not what we're talking about here. I know that's not the point of the heaven on earth, but there's a lot of darkness around how the dominant narrative isn't giving people space to heal. And it isn't empowering clinicians on what to look for. And it isn't recognizing that there may be some other work to do there. And it leaves the people themselves feeling like they're crazy, right? Because it's all invisible.
Right, that mirage. Well, even though this is the Heaven on Earth podcast,
yeah,
we do explore. No, check it out. Because we don't want to emotionally bypass or spiritually bypass anything. And we know that as clinicians, we know that as people who have to heal, we do have to integrate the shadow. And whether that's on a planetary level, national level,
yep,
familial level,
community,
personal level, we have to talk about the gooey, dense, hard, difficult tunnels that we have to navigate on all levels in order to get to heaven on earth, right? Heaven on earth isn't just like, let's all just think positive. We have to do the internal work of integration, of self-understanding, of grief. So absolutely. What do you mean? Because I think what you're describing a lot is the mirage, including, let's say, the mirage of heaven on earth that jumps over doing the hard work or the difficult or the painful work. Say more about the mirage, about what do you mean by the $1 billion industry, or can you say more about that?
I'm going to just
1 minute.
I'm going to help you stay focused. I will say something super short, but this is humongous. And it might not be kind of the spot on the Heaven on Earth podcast, but people pay a lot of money for babies. People who want to have families, adoptive families. When a mother is in a struggling situation, they're not pumping money into helping them feel empowered, or saying, my mother was having this like disconnect from her parents, and they were saying, no, you've got to do this. And she didn't have a house or food or shelter. How is she going to? And they were hammering her with that. And so was Catholic Charities, right? They were like, because they didn't want the shame of it as an immigrant family, of their young daughter being pregnant with a child. And the Catholic Church got about back in the day, $30,000, which today is like $60,000 or $75,000. I am saying the organizations running adoption aren't trying to keep a family together. They're not working. They're not sitting down to have family therapy, to talk it out, to like figure out how to keep the bond that starts in utero. If you look at prenatal development, that's not where the money is going. The money is going into big campaigns to pay for the mother to go to a place and be housed as long as she's agreeing to give her baby up. Because when she does, there's a bunch of money coming to the organization that does it. Like I said, I'm not that piece of the pie. I'm the healing piece of the pie. And there's a whole bunch of people that are working to try to change this story. And the United States is not on the forefront of cutting edge around policy. Just policy isn't my slice of the pie. Mental health and wellness is my slice of the pie. So that's what I mean.
Sure. And that it's still true today is what you're saying.
Yes.
It's really still true today.
Oh, yes.
Well, I think 2024 is the year of exposure overall. And I think we've been seeing a lot of systems being exposed certainly since 2020. And that's part of us as a country, as a planet, as a humanity, having to do the work, having to pull out the gunk. So there's no judgment either way. There's just like, you know what? It's time to pull out the gunk, to see, just like we do, Julie, in ourselves, to have to go in there and see some places that are not pleasing, not comfortable, painful, maybe sometimes really ick to look at. But it's the time to do it if we're going to heal as a humanity. So thank you for that 1 minute little bit of exposure.
I was like, well, we could open up a door and go somewhere for a long time.
But I think the other thing that you're talking about when you say this isn't my piece of the pie, I call it a lot like being parts of the body. And that I'm so thankful for people who are doing the work that's not my part of the body. I do. And I can't do their part of the body. I'm not a foot, I'm something else. And I'm just so grateful all over in sort of this human body of the people who do policy work and the people who are on the front lines in other ways. We're on the front lines of healing and trauma rising in particular. So Julie, let's move in a little bit to your volume 2. What began, and I think probably, I'm assuming that volume 2 for you included, which is sort of these awakening moments, this I have to do my own work moment. And I'm assuming that included your profession, who you became as a professional as well.
Yes. Just to share a little light before I get into the volume 2 is everything looked good. White picket fence family. I was the oldest. A couple, my parents who raised me, who couldn't have children, or they thought they couldn't. And it all looked great. I was very adaptable. I fit in with everybody. I was a really good swimmer, and I was on student government, and I got straight A's, and I was on the math team, and I hung out with the athletes and the and the nerds and the druggies and the whatever. Like, I got along with everybody, and that was my coping. And I recognized it because one day I got little hints of the fact that I wasn't really well, but I didn't have context for it because I was like the perfect child. So perfect. Never fought. Never, like my life depended on it. And one day my sister, who was also adopted, was being really naughty, which she did a lot. I know a little more about that theoretically in terms of adopted people, but I remember as a little kid, like maybe I was 12 and she was 10, and I said, you can't do that. You understand, you can't, you're being so difficult. And I took her aside and I was like a big sister, you can't do that. Don't you understand? They're housing us. They're feeding us. They're giving us clothing. Like, I really felt like a beggar, like I had been cast aside and I was a charity case, and I could not upset them in any way because it might make our life, it might be life threatening. And that I didn't realize why I said that. I just knew I felt that. And I was like, don't do this. I said to she kept doing it because that's a whole other thing. She managed her, kind of testing whether she would be rejected in a different way. I just tried
So
to
there
not.
was this sort of sense of a faux family.
Well, the sense was really that I was in danger. And it wasn't just with my family. This was my adaptation to the life that I was born into, right? That's why I got along with everyone. I was always like watching what they were doing and making sure that I was like acceptable for them. So how much did I know about my true self? Like very little, right? Because I was so focused outwardly. And that was my adaptation. So I know this going back. So it moves us into what you're asking me, which is, so of course, I did exactly what my parents and teachers wanted me to do, which was I became an engineer. I was very good at math and science. So I studied engineering and I got my engineering degree because the school I was at was a very, very good engineering school. And they said, 2/3 of you are not going to graduate. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to graduate. We aren't going to graduate with this degree. People switch out and it's very hard. So I did. And I got a very good job right after school because I had to do the right things. And I remember this was kind of where I started to realize I wasn't living my own life. I was living a life for other people. I wasn't really tapped into what I wanted. And I remember very clearly asking myself when I was going to do what I wanted to do while I was in college. So I was maybe 20, something like that. And I would say a definitive moment was when I actually did quit my job, my prestigious consulting job, designing computer systems. And I went back to school and got my master's in social work. And I think that was a defining wake up moment. I had been journaling, I was traveling, and on a plane, I sat next to a psychiatrist and I was very interested in his career and what he was doing. And I ended up learning a lot more. I had almost no room for electives. So it just felt right to me. I was doing a lot more introspective, mindfulness-based work and felt more like my true path. And it was, I think, but the unconscious part. And of course, I started my own personal therapy to figure out what was going on with me and my high anxiety that looked totally fine, but it was driving my performance stuff. And it was exciting and fun. And I realized that a part of that at that moment was also my attempt to save myself really and understand who I was as opposed to kind of walking around as the shell of a person. Mm-hmm. That was my story.
Were you aware that you were in some sort of pain at all? Were you, or did it? No. Okay.
It just was what it was. Like I said, the analogy of a fish in water is the analogy. It's like, I thought this was how life was, right? I thought this is what it was and this is what it looked like. It's like in retrospect, looking back, it was kind of recognizing that I was like on high alert for performing. And trust me, I mean, everything we do to cope and adapt, even if it might cause harm in lots of ways, and trust me, that caused harm in lots of ways to myself and others, I learned a lot from it too. There are definitely life skills I have that I got honestly by learning to be tenacious and have this kind of rigor with my studies and with my sports and things like that. So it's not all terrible, just like anything has its opportunities to teach and to learn and to grow. But I look back and feel that I wasn't truly alive. I did not know how to even register what my opinion was or how I was feeling in relationship to someone else. So that is
right. It was almost like you were just always responding to the environment, like quickly responding, which is also adaptive, right? Just quickly responding to the environment. I'm in two places with two questions, so pick and choose. When did you, and I know this from my own experience where I was like, oh, I'm going to go to therapy. And this was in my 20s where I just started to get like there was enough pain in my life and repetitive emotional responses to situations, mostly relationships, that I just knew I was going to lean into therapy, even though no one around me, no one in my family had gone to therapy. Like It was not a thing to go to therapy,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
leaned into it. When was that for you? And then, Julie, I think this is for later. You're such a good person to talk about defenses as a skill, like how we can transmute, basically, how the wound can be the gift if we intentionally apply it as such. And we'll get there. We'll get there. But let's start with the therapy piece, or those little nudges.
Yeah, no one in my family did therapy because that's not what good Latinas do, you know?
No, especially not back then.
That's not
No
the way you cope
way.
with things. I'm trying to remember. I kind of think it was during grad school. I think it became more of a thing. I was focused. Social work is a very broad field. People go into politics, they go into policy, they do macro, micro, all this stuff. And I was focused on clinical social work. So it was really using yourself as the tool, taking this theory, applying it to practice. So honestly, I feel like my entree into it was really academic. I think that a lot of emphasis was put on becoming a better clinician if you knew yourself better, and you could, you know, we had to do these process recordings where you'd write out your interpretation of what was happening theoretically, as well as the emotionality around it, as a tool to really see some of the parts that were invisible that were happening in the session. So it was really more of a personal curiosity, academic endeavor. And then it quickly became very deeply personal because I had there was a lot to unpack and a lot to work with. And honestly, that's what opened up my passion for this non-talk work. Because one of the traps of my fellow adopted people is you think, oh, I'm going to go to therapy, so I have to talk about stuff that's happened to me. Do you think I remember being in the womb or being in an orphanage? No, I do not. Not up here, not consciously. It's that my cells remembered it, right? That maybe there wasn't, you know, there was a big rupture and there was an environment where there wasn't enough resources. And I know this all theoretically because of my study, that babies in orphanages don't cry because they know there aren't enough resources for them, right? So that's just a part of my cellular history. So if I'm going to go to regular old therapy, I don't have a story to tell except for some intellectual story that's been regurgitated to me, not a present kind of engaged story. So that really spurs my passion for all the very cool tools we can use that transcend language and words and can still move the data, right?
So I would love for you to go into this because you are an expert at implicit memory and nonverbal memorization of our wounds and what we can do with them. And I'm not sure, Julie, it's not my experience that in sort of the trend talking about psychotherapy that enough focus is given on implicit memory and nonverbal access and nonverbal memorization. Can you really share with us so that anyone who's listening to this is like, oh my gosh, that's me, or I can do this work?
Yeah. So here's the deal. All you need to know, if I went into it in a real clinical way, it gets super boring, super fast. Our cells, our muscles, our brain, our nervous system, which is like brain to spinal cord, they hold data. We're programmed to survive. We're programmed to adapt. And that data informs whether our heart's beating faster, our throat closes up, if we start to feel tension. It will influence things that we can't control, right? There's a lot of annoying things that happen in our body where we're like, I really wish this wasn't happening. And some of them are related to inflammation. And inflammation is a direct reaction to stress, whether it's physical stress, emotional stress, psychological stress. And so we can change this mapping so that things like chronic fatigue go away, so that things like vertigo go away, so that things like gastrointestinal struggles go away. I'm not even kidding. It is so cool because a lot of times those are stress reactions that we learned from something in the past. And that past may be something you can consciously remember, or not. It doesn't matter if you don't have an explicit memory, you can still get into that data system, which is held in the body, and change it. And believe it or not, some of that mapping may come from your mother or your grandmother, and it's passed down through relational transactions where you learn, I'm going to make this up. Let's say my mother was in a terrible situation of violence of some type. And so now, as her adaptation, she's always looking, that's pretty adaptive if you think someone's going to come and attack you or jump on you. And now I'm a little kid and I'm a little developmentally, I'm 5 years old. And when we're young, we're really hungry to understand the world. And now I'm about to cross the street and she's like, oh, wait, stop. Or like she's walking with me and there's a constant like, wait, oh, jumping and looking and hold on, or like yelling, you should have been watching. Why weren't you watching? Right? The desperation of like, I want you to be safe. I want to feel in control. She never told me anything of what happened to her. I don't even know she was attacked one time. I have no idea. Never told. Don't remember. Don't even know it. But I know through her relationship to me, her beloved child, that she believes the world is unsafe and that bad things can happen when you're not watching and that you have to be vigilant and careful. Something like that. So it's just an example of how it can come into your system, even if you don't have a conscious memory with it. And here's all these, there's so many things. I do want to say this. We have a workshop series called the Holistic Presentations for Growth, and it's for anyone. It's like actually set up to be workshoppy for anyone. Yes, clinicians for sure if they want to, but anyone who wants to understand this huge toolbox that we have, these many, many ways we can get in and change what's happening on this deeper unconscious level. Yeah. And we have that workshop series. It is so accessible. It's a low cost thing, but if someone can't afford it, our client specialist will let them in for free. It's really a part of our mission and vision for people to be more empowered, to know there's an option, that there are different tools. Like I'm a specialist in brain-based therapy, but you know what? We had someone come in who talked about nature-informed therapy. We had someone talk about all the cutting edge research and science that's been going on around psychedelics and how they can open a portal inside and really help with depression and trauma. Yeah. We've had people coming in. We just had someone doing high vibrational mandalas. There are all these visual or sensory experiential ways we can move that mapping now. And it matters so much. Anyway, I am off on
wait,
massive tangent, but you asked me.
Goal that we're going to pause and stop. Say the name of the workshop series.
It's called the Holistic Presentations for Growth.
Okay. Holistic. And this, people can find this at
www.vivapartnership.com.
Vivapartnership.com. Like, let's get this news out there. So, we're going to have links and all of that too, because exactly, this is what we want. We want this rippling out on planet Earth, on all of humanity. We can have access to this. So,
and it's fun, by the way. It's fun. I think some of the problem is people think, oh my gosh, this is not therapy. This is like just empowering you about how your body works. And it feels so good when you get relief from some of these old messages or old adaptations. Like it is freeing. I honestly think, you and I do a lot of fun things, and there are lots of fun things to do on the planet. But I think it's super fun to have a body that's cooperating with you, where you can really engage and be connected to other people, and you can pick and choose the things that you want to do in life and the people that you want to be around based on who you are as a unique person. Like that's really beautiful, and it's fun. It makes life fun.
Well, that's part of my personal, Julie, definition of heaven on earth is having a calm central nervous system. And actually, because I'm a CPTSD survivor, I'm a complex post-traumatic stress, to finally be able to be in my body more often than not without hypervigilance. Exactly what you were describing, really to be able to be embodied. And I actually think we're really coming into an era where talking about embodiment is now commonplace. It used to not be. And the invitation here is that at least for my heaven on earth version, and all of us can create our own heaven on earth version, is the ability to move, to gently either move or find new ways of being in the body, either alongside our trauma or have it start moving out. Not having, I always call it like a blob that used to just live in my body and was constantly reacting to all sorts of stimuli. And little by little, just the ability to enthrone myself, to come back, to breathe slowly, and to start loving it, because there's been a lot of self-hate because of how my body has responded. Because if you know how jacked up your body can be in a hypervigilant state, and Julie, when you were describing that mom and what that mom does to children, and certainly what I've done to my child because of that passing down, at least now I can speak to it to my own child to say, oh, it looks like you're having this response to my response. It's the tightening of the stomach.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of ways. The tightening of the stomach, the feeling in danger, even though if I look around, there is no danger, that adrenaline and the cortisol moving through my body. Those are the things that you're describing. The not being able to eat or having to immediately go to the bathroom. Those are all responses that my body has had to trauma. Julie, can you talk more about maybe I'm not sure if it's modalities, but some of the ways that nonverbal healing can happen, that it's not just talk therapy, which assumes an ability to pull stuff out and put it into words. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there are actually a lot of ways to access that part of the nervous system that's automatically, compulsively responding to things in the environment. And it all has to do with sensory data. It's why, in my personal opinion and my practice wisdom of watching this for over 3 decades, that talk really falls short, because when we're talking to this, your frontal lobe. And when we're having those physical reactions, it's really the central part of the brain that is taking in data through sight, smell, sound, touch, taste, like all the senses, like the example that I gave. And so the way that we work with that is shift that data. Now, for me, my training was in brain-based work. So it looks like not talking. We're really giving data to our system and then following the neural pathway, but it's brain-based. It can be body-based. So it's it's like listening to what your body's saying and helping it move out of your body. It can be nature. It can be data that comes in from the earth or comes in from the environment, right? It's a smell, a sound, a taste, but it's used in a very specific way to shift old coping patterns.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. You know, I am having a bittersweet moment to notice that we probably have 5 more minutes to talk. And Julie, I just want ahead of a time say that I'd love to have you. We're going to have you here again for sure, because I know that folks are just going to love this podcast. Can we talk a little bit about what you're doing, what you're offering? And, you know, you were the one who taught me the concept of post-traumatic growth, which is what I, in my own language, call trauma rising, which is, I think, the belief that we can grow from our trauma. We can actually, I call it the high alchemy of moving it into something that we can actually use. Can you say a little bit about that? But also, what are you doing? How are you gifting humanity and the planet with all this stuff? We want to know all the stuff that you're offering, Julie.
Well, I think it starts with being empowered around how our bodies work and tapping into some of those non-talk-based tools. I've been for 20 years leading retreats on transformation. So actually having people workshop their way into making changes in their life, however they want to make those. Obviously, I have a fleet of therapists at Viva who are doing non-talk based work. So it's a guide coming in to help people get connected to their own inner wisdom and find their way out of some of these knots and some of these outdated coping mechanisms. We're really passionate about looking at the human system as beautiful and adaptive. And no matter how much struggle, we do not use classic mental health terms like disorder. We don't even believe in that. If a body is operating in a certain way and has symptoms, there's just a question to ask, which we don't even have to have the answers to, which is that we know something happened in your life, whether it's a physical thing that happened to you or something you downloaded from your parents, like the example that I gave, and we're going to work to shift your nervous system to change that. So it's all these clinicians, it's these retreats. I do intensives. So if someone wants to go
a little
in,
bit about that. So Julie actually founded the Viva Center, which is in downtown DC, and it is
and in Maryland and in Virginia.
Yes. Yes, in Washington. And the clinicians there are just amazing, 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 amazing. And they're constantly getting trained by Julie, but also by others. They're just the rigor and the excitement with which your clinicians learn. That's why I refer so many people.
Thank you, Claudia. And they're very passionate about what they're doing. And really, what they're doing is helping people live more fully in their bodies and really enjoy their life and create their heaven on earth. I was going to say, I do these intensives also. I like to call it trauma surgery, but it's where I spend half a day, a full day, or a couple days with someone to really get in there and make profound shifts, because we can do that. We know how to do that. I've been also involved with really helping female entrepreneurs. I think small businesses change the world. When there's a leader at the top who's really embodied and they're present, it trickles down to the people they serve and the people employed by them. So I feel really excited and passionate about that too. And I think embodiment's a good word. I'm launching some programs over the summer and in the fall that are going to help some of the powerful women of our community and culture really enhance the experiences of people that work with and around them. So I'm feeling passionate about that. But we're all working. There's so many people working to make this earth a better place and a better experience. And I think that comes with dialogue like you're facilitating with your podcast. I want to thank you for your time and dedication to that. I know you're doing your part to try to elevate people's experiences on this planet.
I just feel so honored to be connected to you, because it's interesting. All of your engineering is also, you're using it in terms of the body, of mental health, of emotional healing, of systems, of family systems, like all of that is there. And so not only are you a successful entrepreneur, I know that you own real estate. I know. So the Julie embodies trauma rising to its nth degree and being in her body, just being so empowered in who you are.
Working on that every day, all the time.
Sister, you are there. You are there. Oh, that's my little alarm.
I love that alarm. It's so gentle. Just like you.
Let's take 3 breaths together. It's what I invite people to do at the end. So we're going to just take a deep breath. And we're going to breathe it out. And our second one. And breathe it out. And our third one. And breathe it out. And this is how I like to end our this podcast in spiritual and cellular communion. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Love it, Claudia. Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you again.
Okay.
Ciao. Ciao. Gracias.
Ciao.